All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Nothing for Nothing Leaves Nothing podcast. I am your host, Lewis, and today's topic is going to be relationships. Let's talk about it. Gentlemen, here we are, so let's get into it. Relationships. Let's look at what the Oxford Languages version of a relationship is. It states, the way in which two or more concepts, objects, or people are connected, or the state of being connected. Rather interesting thought, right? So let's get into it. There are many different types of relationships, right? You have relationships between people and family members. You have relationships between people of the opposite sex, right? So let's talk about the relationship between people of the opposite sex, right? Let's get into that, right? Now, back in the day, when it came to relationships, there was a pattern that was followed. People would court the other person. A male would court a woman, right? Go through the whole process of, trying to find his way into her heart, right? And that's how relationships began. Also, relationships were formed due to family members or families looking to seek or gain something. Back in the day, they would use that to further a family, right? If you have a family that was affluent, right, or had money, and there was a family less than, if they had a daughter or something like that, they would marry the daughter into the family to have growth for both, for both families to prosper, or for the family of lesser means to be able to prosper. As you move through time, those things tend to change, right? So when it comes to relationships and the concept of a relationship through cultures, things are defined very differently. Now, how are those differences defined as you look at them? Well, they're defined in many different ways, right? If you look at it from, an African American culture, they look at relationships one way as opposed to, white people looking at a relationship another way, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Mexicans, Filipinos, like just go through the list of races, right? Everybody looks at a relationship differently. And it's structured that way, right? So they always talk about gender roles when it comes to how relationships work, right? You have a male's role, you have a woman's role, and those are defined very distinctly based off of a culture. So if you look at a Mexican culture, right, like the man is always seen as the dominant figure in a relationship. Back in the day, that's how it was always defined. In today's world and climate, if you look at, African American relationships, actually relationships as a whole, right, the male was always seen as the dominant person in the relationship, the person that made all the rules, determined everything because they worked, they provided, and that was the status quo. You look at society now, that seems to have taken a change. The change that you see a lot of times is gender roles have been made null and void in a sense at times, right? Not always the case, but in certain situations it may come across and seem that way. In today's world, women work, women make money. Sometimes they make more money than men, and that a lot of times causes issues when it comes to relationships. But if you're looking at a relationship, every relationship has a basic beginning, right? You have to have one person that's attracted to another. Those people end up at some point talking or connecting, and then from there things progress into a full-blown romantic relationship, because there are different type of relationships. But let's talk about romantic relationships. So when you look at that, you look at how does that form. People have different thought process, different viewpoints when it comes to relationships. What we're going to do today is look at a couple of those concepts that roll into that and kind of see, my humble opinion, how those things play out and how those progress. So let's dive into it as we continue to roll through this podcast. So obviously the relationships I'm talking about is between a man and a woman, right? Now I know in today's society you have different relationships you have same-sex relationships where folks identify as different things of that nature. Cool, more power to you. Have no issues with that. Whatever floats your boat and how you want to live your life is how you live it. But we are specifically going to talk about relationships between a man and a woman. Now, let's look at some of those things that people would see as things to think about when it comes to relationships, right? So, You go in, you find somebody, you see that they're attractive, so you're like, okay, I either want to talk to this person or get to know this person. That's what you would think. Years ago, that was usually the norm. I want to get to know this person. So you approach, you start talking, and then from there, it progresses. So one of the things, or a few of the things that I want to talk about when it came to this is those concepts of how people view or come across things when it comes to starting a relationship. Going on the first date. What are the topics that you talk about during the first date? How does that progress? How do people view those moments? Are there things that come up during that time that you can see from either side as a red flag? Or is that something where you look at it and you're like, okay, let's see if we can figure this out and progress to see where things go as they move on. Every time there's an interaction between the male and the female, for the most part, especially when it's coming from a relationship standpoint, there are things that people go through and processes that they go through to figure out if this person is the person they want to continue a relationship with. So let's look at it. One thing that always comes up is age gap, right? The age difference between the two parties. Does that play a factor? Does it not play a factor? In my opinion, I don't think in most cases it plays a factor. Now, there are extremes in the matter, right? Like if you get somebody that's a major gap in age, a lot of times the issue that comes in there is the different I wouldn't say cultures, different mindsets of where people are at in their life, right? If you're dating somebody that's super, super older than you, like you talking, I'll say at minimum like 20 years older than you, there's a big age gap there, right? So there's different things and different ways that they look at and viewpoint, look at things in the world, and looking at those things differently might cause an issue for that type of relationship, right? When you look at that also in that concept, why is it that if a guy dates a younger woman, not so much an issue, usually. But if a woman dates a younger guy, there's a problem, right? Like why is that a thing? Don't know. It's just things that you see in, in conversations it comes up. Sometimes people look at it as they see it as a double standard, right? And that's always been a thing in the world where there's a double standard between the male and the female. How come things are acceptable for a male but not acceptable for a female? That's always the question. In my opinion, I don't think there should be a discrepancy between the two. I think everything should be looked at the same. Now, you look at that age gap and you narrow it down to where you're like 5 to 6 years or, a few years. Like the smaller the number, the gap is still a gap there because of the, ages, different mindsets, different points that people out there are in their life. However, does that really stand the test of time? 9 times out of 10, it usually doesn't, from what I've seen. And the reason I say it doesn't stand the test of time is because of the simple fact being people's mindsets change. And people are at different mindsets at different stages in their life. Usually if you're looking at an age, so if you're assuming somebody is in the age between, 18 to 25, a lot of times there's a predetermination of what kind of mindset that person is in. But every now and again, you come across a person where their mindset is a lot more advanced than what their age is. That's just how they live their life. They live life at a different pace and they're looking and seeking different things. So a lot of times when you come to an age gap in those kind of relationships, the gap is not as vast from an intellectual standpoint because even though the person may be younger than you, you still might be on par as far as thought processes and mindset. When the age gap, like I said, if you're looking at a 5 to 6 year gap. But that first date, right? What are things that come up on a first date that people talk about? I've heard people talk about, the usual stuff. Hobbies, what is a person like? What do they don't like? Things that they like to do. And then I've heard things about, like, people on the first date asking about, like, a person's education, right? Kind of a intriguing one to think about, right? But what are you looking at to get from that information? Everybody's mindset is different and everybody's thought process is different. But it's an interesting thing to think about when being on a first date and having those conversations when you're talking about hobbies, things you like to do, what do you like? What's your family like? The question always comes up is, what is too much to talk about on a first date? I guess it depends on the person, right? Depends on how vulnerable a person wants to be and how somebody takes that vulnerability. Some people may take and accept somebody, dumping the whole shebang on somebody on the first date as a sign of, oh, got to go, right? Because it's too much. Somebody might not be willing to handle all that or accept all that information. But that shouldn't be the end all be all, right? Everybody, you understand and get that gauge from what to talk about and what you're talking about based off of conversations you had more than likely before the first date and then leading into it. Next part that comes up, expectations. How do you navigate expectations when it comes to relationships? The start of a relationship, once the relationship has gone on, once the relationship ends. Expectations are seen all around us, no matter what we're doing and how we're doing it. And the reason expectations come up like that is because, once again, you're talking about a person's mindset and their thought process. What is somebody's expectation of a relationship? And this can be molded and influenced by a lot of different things. Past relationships, relationships with family members, things going on in life. People look to different things, and that's how you a lot of times form an expectation. You might have a thought process of, like years ago, people used to talk about women planning their wedding when they were young, right? You get a girl and she's like, when I get married, my wedding's going to have this, and this. Expectations. They get married and then they end up getting married at the courthouse, right? None of that stuff that they was expecting to get, they didn't. That they were expecting to get, they didn't get it. Now, that can be due to a variety of different reasons. Things in life might have changed. Processes might have changed. Their thought process might have changed. Or the person that they particularly want to marry wasn't able to provide those things to them. But now, again, when it comes to expectations, how much are you willing to move and shift those expectations when what your expectation of a situation or of a person doesn't turn into fruition or doesn't come to fruition? How do you handle that? What do you do with that? Is that a conversation where you have a conversation with the person like, hey, these are what my expectations are? You would assume that happens somewhere around the beginning of the relationship when you're filling things out and going through that process of getting to know each other. But 9 times out of 10, a lot of times, sometimes it don't happen, right? And why doesn't that happen? It could be different reasons. Who knows those reasons? Only people that really know those reasons are the people that are in that situation. But it's something to think about. It's something that comes up. Expectations, to me, I believe should be stated very clearly. And I say that based off of past experiences where I didn't do that. I'm no relationship expert, just going based off of, things in my past, things that have happened. And a lot of times that can end up causing an issue. And then the question is, how do you navigate that? If you weren't forthcoming with what your expectations were of a relationship, that can end up leading to trouble in a relationship where things that were presumed to be good end up being not good, or thought processes and things of that nature. So be mindful of that. If you have an expectation of somebody or you have an expectation of your relationship, make sure that it's stated. Make sure that it is clear and stated, because you can state something and the person not understand what you're saying. So make sure the things that you state are clear and it is understood. Just from personal experiences, like I said, you have to be able to have those moments and have those conversations when it comes to being in a relationship. But let's talk about the early stages of a relationship. Early stages, what does that look like? Obviously, you meet a person, you court the person, or you should. In today's world, I don't see or foresee people courting each other because everything is social media and everything is on social media. 9 times out of 10, you go look up somebody's page. If you start talking to people, well, let me rephrase that. Let's back up a little bit. As the age of social media came about, things when it came to dating changed because information about that person became readily available due to people posting and putting everything online, right? People, or I knew friends of mine that would, if they were getting into a relationship with somebody, the first thing they're going to do is look the person up, right? They Google it, Facebook pops up, and then Instagram and all that kind of stuff. And then based off of what they see is what they would judge. They would make a determination to, yes, I want to continue to talk to this person, or no, I don't, based off of social media. And then let it be the person that doesn't have a social media. And then apparently that became all kinds of red flags where the person was like, why is this person not on social media? What is the thing? What do they have to hide? Sometimes people don't have to hide anything. It's just Some people just didn't want to be online or be that open online. So that's neither here nor there. It's just one of those things and concepts that came up when it came to relationships. But as you look, like I said, the early stages, what does that look like? Years and years ago, early stages were going on dates, getting to know each other, having conversations, seeing where each other was as far as a mindset goes and what plans and things were of that nature. And when I say these early stages, these stages change depending on where you're at. Obviously, if you're in high school and you start dating somebody, you 9 times out of 10 you're looking for your first piece of ass. Let's call a spade a spade. At least for guys, anyway. Ladies might be looking for that forever love, but most dudes around that time, early high school, you're virgin, you trying to get that cherry popped, you looking for some booty, right? So your concept and your viewpoints and how you're approaching things is usually because you got one goal and that's what you're looking for. That's high school. Now you move into a phase of life where you get out of high school, college, whatever, things of that nature. I say 9 times out of 10 dudes still kind of looking for the same thing. They looking to party, have some fun. To each his own. At that time, there might have been some ladies that's looking and willing to do the same thing. Hey, everybody goes through a phase where they just want to go party and have some fun. But remember, sometimes you got to tell them no. Via Cat Williams. But that's that stage. Then you progress into the stage where you're kind of getting into your own, you're starting to live life, starting to mature. The fun, crazy, wild stuff that you used to do when you were in your, late teens, so you're 18, so like you're 25, 28, so you start approaching that 30 range. Your viewpoint of a relationship and what you're looking for changes, right? Now you're looking for more of a person to be a life partner. And that can go back to, folks in their 20s too, because like I said, talked about mindsets. People in those mindsets could have those views and thought process at that time as well, because people have done it and progressed through. You have people that meet in high school, and then from high school, that person becomes their end-all be-all, and they just click, and that becomes their person. 30, 40 years later, they still together, and people are like, when did they meet? They met in high school. It happens. That's how relationships form. You have different kinds of relationships, and they build and form off of different things. But as you look at those stages, like I said, those early stages of relationships, at different points in your life, that early stage of relationship may be very, very different. But as you progress into those later years, so like when you start getting into, like I said, you in your 30s or whatever, and you're going into relationships, your viewpoint is looking at things differently. So your stages of the relationship begin to change. Like I said, you start off dating, going on dates, getting to know each other and things of that nature as you progress through. And then you warp that into today's society. I don't know how that rolls. I really don't. Based off of what I hear from sometimes from talking to people, it is a world of mess and craziness. Why? Because everything is on social media. People post everything on social media. So when it comes to relationships, how can you have that solidarity and that intimacy when it comes to getting to know a person if everything that you do, they want to post on social media? Kind of kills the vibe. Like, talk about people not staying in a moment in today's world. Everybody is quick to post, to do something, to do everything. Like, you've seen viral videos of guys taking women on dates, and then, like, the woman refused to get out of the car because the guy took her to a certain restaurant. When did that become an issue? Years ago, you take a person on a date. Hopefully you did what we like to call a military leaders recon, where you're going out surveying and trying to get some info from that person to understand what, here we go, expectations, right? What their expectation is of a first date. Most ladies, I would assume, would want, if a guy is taking a lady out on the first date, for the guy to plan out that evening and lay out the events and then convey that information to the ladies so that they can get ahead and be prepped and ready. You don't want to take a girl on a date or take a woman on a date and then you have a plan for at some point to be a long walk and she got some crazy heels on. It's probably not a good look. You probably done screwed something up. But those early stages, that's part of the early stages. Learning. Once you get through the phase, that first early stage of, like I like to call talking, when people are kind of talking and understanding each other. Now you move into that next phase where it's like, boom, okay, now you're officially a couple. How does that phase work? Well, this is the phase, I believe, where You're still getting to learn each other, and you're still getting to understand each other. But now you might start seeing a little of those quirks and stuff start to pop up that you didn't see when you guys were talking, right? How does that play out? How does that change things? How does that mess with your expectations of what this relationship is and what this relationship is going to turn into? It's an amazing concept when you have conversations with folks and you just talk about relationships. You can talk to several different people, and everybody's makeup and understanding of a relationship a lot of times is a little bit different. And the differences are very small, but can be very big at the same time. So somebody having an expectation of a person texting them all the time, or a person seeing them on a regular basis, expectation. And then the other person's expectation is, hey, I will see you because my work schedule is a little bit busy. I will see you and make time for you when I can, and progress and go that way. How does that play out? A lot of times it ends up turning into an issue. So now you go from talking to now you're in a relationship, and that's still that first stage of being in a relationship, now you're having some difficulties and some issues. So how do you navigate those? I would say the best way to do that is to talk. Now that's coming off of past experiences, like I said. I'm not saying I'm a relationship expert or guru. However, when you been in relationships and you understand your wrongdoings in relationships and your mishaps in them, if you're smart, you learn from the things that you didn't do. Another thing that folks, when it comes to relationships, don't do all the time, or people carry baggage from relationships, which is another thing that comes up in those beginning stages. Sometimes everything comes up in the beginning stage, and sometimes it doesn't. A lot of times you end up with concepts of people trying to move past a bad relationship, and trying to move past a bad relationship, you end up taking the stuff from your bad relationship and putting it on the person that you are now in a relationship with. How do you navigate that? Time, effort, and a whole lot of conversation. And the reason you have to have a conversation is because you're trying to get an understanding. See, as a guy, and this is something I learned about myself when I went through a course at my church called Peel the Onion. And the purpose of this course was for you to kind of dig deep from a spiritual level and understand some things about yourself and your life, things that you've been through in your life and how those things in your life affected you. But one of the things I learned during that time was as a guy, which some guys do have this, guys can have a thing called a hero complex, right? What does that mean? Hero complex means you want to be the person to try to help and save everybody when they have a situation going on. Now, this can be twofold. Some guys use this as a manipulation tactic to work their way in when it comes to getting to know a female or getting to understand a female or of a person that they're pursuing, right? It is a very, very rough thing to know and understand, but when you fully understand it, it makes you more aware of the things that you're doing and how you conversate and talk to people. I know for me, like I said, when I was going through that process and understanding it, and then I start to take a step back and look at relationships I've been in, and you start to wonder, like, dang, was I really in that relationship for that reason, or was there something more than that? What I've discovered is, for myself, that hero complex is not so much a thing where it's like it's thought of and you're like, oh man, I gotta try to save everybody. A lot of times it's completely not even in your forefront. You're just having conversations with folks and you might understand it's like, man, that's kind of messed up. I'm gonna help a person out. Hey, here's my viewpoints on some stuff and move on from it. But let's exploring that concept. Let's look at how, if you're in a relationship with somebody and you tend to do that, how does that look to the person that you're in a relationship with? See, this is the thing where, as a guy, you have to understand the woman that you're with and understand that woman's viewpoint and understanding of those kind of interactions when it comes to another female, right? So a lot of times early on in relationships, this comes up a lot, and then it comes up actually a lot of times throughout the entirety of a relationship, depending on what the person's viewpoint is and how they view those interactions between a male and a female, especially a male and a female, when a male, or like if from a guy's standpoint, if a guy's looking at a female from this viewpoint, understanding and looking at that interactions with the opposite sex when you're in a relationship, very tricky. It can be very tricky. And the reason I say it can be very tricky is because like I said, you're looking at understanding somebody's viewpoint and somebody's understanding. Now, you can try to explain this to the person that you're in a relationship with. However, they have to be receptive to the understanding. But it's twofold. You can't talk and not be receptive to information coming back to you. So when you're having this conversation with your partner, you have to be willing to understand their viewpoints and where they're coming from. And then after that, you guys have to find some way to meet somewhere in the middle. Sometimes that can happen and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes people just can't meet in the middle on it. It's just like they have a viewpoint in the concept. You have a viewpoint in the concept. You try to explain it and then it just don't click. But like I said, getting back to that understanding of having, kind of having that thing of having a hero complex, and then you sit there and think about it, you're like, dang, man, like, how does that shape my interactions with people? And before, like I said, before I went through that class, I was like, I never thought about it. Never thought about it. But then after, it was like, okay, got to be mindful about how conversations are going, how conversations are being talked about, and how that interaction plays out. And the reason I say that is because as a guy, sometimes we are very oblivious to how our conversations can come off to a person of the opposite sex. Now, what I mean by that is you can be having a conversation with a lady and have no intention of being flirty or trying to pursue anything with that person. However, interpretation, that person can pull the information or the things that you're saying to them and take that as you being flirty or you, in today's terms, shooting your shot. So how do you navigate that? As a guy, you just have to be mindful of the conversations that you're having, thinking about what's being said, how is it being said, and how things can be interpreted. Now, most people would say, man, that's kind of messed up. You should be able to talk freely and not have to worry about that. Yes, this is true. But if you know that things that you say can be interpreted a certain way, you have to be mindful of what you say. And that goes for ladies too. You have some ladies that have their version of a hero's complex to where they can be talking to somebody and the person be having issues or whatever. And all they're trying to do is like be nice, right? Try to come to the person, hey man, it's going to be all right. Don't worry about it. Things will get better, so on and so forth. And that dude is like, man, she wants me, right? And then you're sitting there like, I've had buddies that did it. And you sit there looking at dudes like, how did you peel that information? It's like, man, you see the way she was talking to me, man. Like she was trying to be there for me, man. That means, that's telling me, man, that she want to see what's up. It's like, nah, bro. Like you completely missed the boat. I have no clue how you picked up on that information based off of what she said to you. But teacher's own. But that's how things play out, right? Interpretations and expectations. I think expectations is a big thing for relationships, and it comes up a lot because your mindset a lot of times can be so focused on what your expectations are of a person that it can ruin a relationship before it even starts. And the reason I say that is because you can sit there and look at a person and be like, oh man, that person's attractive. And you sometimes, and people do this, people come up with a whole concept based off of just the look of a person. Oh, their personality is like this. They have to be this type of person. They have to be a person that has this or does this. Then you peel all that surface level crap back and realize, one, that person's a dick or an a-hole. And now you're like, what in the world did I get myself into? It's a weird thing getting into a relationship or being in relationships. And the reason it's a weird thing, nobody is the same and everybody's mindset and things are different. You have no clue what this person's been through or what they're experiencing in their life, right? Relationships, and when you get into a relationship, a lot of times people in relationships, the whole purpose of a relationship is to grow together, right? You have your stuff, they have their stuff, and you obviously exchange that information, and then your goal is to build something and to grow into something long term. A lot of times it works, sometimes it doesn't. When it doesn't work, people do the finger pointing game. This person did this person did that. And the one thing that I noticed that people fail to do is look internally. looking on the inside. In every situation and every story, there's two sides. There's your side, there's the other person's side, and then there's the truth. How do you face your truths? That's the thing that I think a lot of people fail to do. Even when a relationship is going good, you should still self-assess. And the reason I say you should self-assess is because you, like I said, you're growing. Everybody grows. You should grow. Nobody should stay stagnant. And that's the main thing in life. Work, relationships, what you do for yourself, your thought process. You should always be seeking to improve and get better. When you're in relationships, you should always look to do the same thing. Having an expectation of a person and that expectation not being met, it does sway and change mindsets of people in relationships. A lot of times if a person doesn't meet an expectation, the other person will end up leaving very, very quickly. And then sometimes you have people that have an expectation and they're locked into where they're like, this person is going to be that. And then they force or look to change a person to something that they want. And that doesn't work either, right? When you're trying to get somebody to change completely who they are to fit a mold that you have, it hardly ever works. In some cases it might, but let's call a spade a spade. In most situations like that, like they talk about when you're in a relationship and arguing, right? People are like, oh, this is perfect couple because they never argue. If you are in a relationship and you don't argue, there is a major issue on somebody's front. It could be the male side, it could be the female side. Relationship should be 50-50, give and take. You give a little, take a little, give a little, take a little. In those cases where they're like, they don't argue, their relationship's so great, a perfect couple, there's a problem. Because somebody is taking a lot and somebody is giving a lot. And if you've been in a situation where you've been on either end of that spectrum, from what I've seen, it's never a good look. It always ends badly. If somebody's giving more than the other person, it turns into an issue. If somebody's taking more than the other person, it turns into an issue. There's no balance. Everything when it comes to relationships, you have to have balance. And that's the thing about relationships now as opposed to back in the day, right? Relationships now seem like microwaves. Quick, you don't feel like you're getting what you're getting. There's no time put in, there's no effort, and people just quick to throw somebody to the side and move on to the next person. And then you think about, this is the year 2024. I was born in 1987, so let's look at some stuff from before I was born, at least stuff that you've seen or read in books. People used to get together and they would stay together. Hella hot water. And there are some people now today that still hold true to that concept. Most of those folks are usually older and been around the block for an extended period of time. But that's something that people see today as foreign, right? They say, why would I stay in a relationship if this is happening and this is happening, this is happening? And a lot of it comes down to the concept of you made a commitment, right? So if you made a commitment to somebody to stick it out through and through, that's what people did. Now, there are exceptions to those rules, right? Obviously, if it's an abusive situation, where somebody's life's in danger or at risk, and it's just not a situation that's beneficial to you in the sense of like overall, like it can really cause you some harm, obviously you get out of that relationship. But people still stay. Years ago, back in the day, man, people would get married, get together, person might be 16 years old and end up with a person, and then they stick through and through all kinds of craziness. Sometimes even when it comes to abuse and assault, people will still stick around and stay. Even though everybody around them is telling them like, man, this is not a good situation, you need to get out of it. But people lock into a commitment and they hold on to it. Some people would say that's foolish, but to each his own, right? Everybody has a viewpoint, and that self-internal thing that people hold on to, that if they make a decision to do something, they don't budge from it, they just lock into it. Like I said, people were getting married and be in relationships, and I've seen it. I mean, you've seen it in movies and stuff like that, and people be like, oh man, this movie is not real. I've heard stories from friends, from aunts and uncles and stuff about those situations where people were together for over 40 years. The dude was out doing all kinds of reckless shit, messing around, getting in the crap, getting caught, getting in the crap, women showing up to the house, talking all kinds of crazy to the wife and all this crazy stuff, and person still stayed. Now, I'm not sitting there saying there was no issues during that time and stuff wasn't jumping off, because it was. People got crazy. But they still stayed. And if you look at relationships now, like I said, it's like almost like a microwave. As soon as something goes wrong, people quick to dip. Oh man, I'm out. Gotta go. And then it makes you sit back and wonder, like, what in the culture or what in the world has changed for people's mindset to go from stick out everything through and through, no matter what, and opposed to now where it's like quick microwave. This is not working, got to go on to the next one, on to the next one, on to the next one, on to the next one. Like, how do you live life that way? It's like you're seeking something that you can't find, and 9 out of 10, the reason you might not be able to find this is because you have a self-internal issue. Nobody today, well, I'm not going to say nobody today because people do it. A lot of times today, people are so caught up in the fantasy of a situation that they fail to look at the reality of it. And when I say the fantasy of it, I use social media as a clear example. You'll see people on social media posting pictures. They taking pictures here. They dress this way. They look like they jet setting and traveling all over the place. And they're the most miserable people. They might be one of the most miserable people on the planet. But people will never know, because according to social media, they live in a life. Everything is great. They got it together. And then you see tragedies of people taking their own lives because they're trying to live this false reality. Relationships, the same thing. People have an expectation, an assumption of what a relationship is or how it's supposed to go. And when that's not met, they quick to bolt. So I say in closing, in this relationship podcast part 1, because in the next couple of ones I want to dive into a couple of more deeper concepts of it. What is your viewpoint of a relationship? What do you think it is? How do you think it should go? Excuse me. Do you feel expectations are the main source for relationships to fail? Do you feel like this is the main source for relationships to succeed? Do you think if you were born, in the 1900s, as Charlemagne the God would say, which is pretty funny, do you feel like the times have changed in a negative way that it makes relationships seem almost obsolete in a sense, right? And I say obsolete because you see people that say, I don't want to be in a relationship. I just want to have my fun and keep it moving, right? But how do you live life like that? We were all made to have a person, Adam and Eve, right? God made Adam first, and then he took from Adam's rib and made Eve. You are made to have a companion. That is the nature of things. That's how it works. People go through it and don't do that or have it. It makes you wonder. But think about those things. Process those things. Leave comments down in the bottom. Let me know what your thought process is. Let me know what you think. And when we get to part 2 of Relationship Podcast, we're going to dive deep into some other concepts in relationships and how those play in, how those have an effect, and what those things mean. This is Lewis Ling signing off. Make sure you guys like, listen, and subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next go around. Holla at ya.